Southend is very different from other compound pharmacies because we have one thing that a lot of companies don't. We focus our entire model on you. Everything we do here, this new facility that we put into play, is all related to being able to get you the care that you need faster. I don't think anybody out there can do it as good as we do. When providers reach out to us with any question, they're clinical or not, our team of pharmacists are here to help them. And we listen. They're able to pick up the phone, call us. Humans, at the end of the day, are able to pick up and talk to them. I see Southend headed to be the leading compound pharmacy in all of America.
Hi, and welcome, and thank you for joining us today. I'm so excited for the content we have planned for you guys, but we'll kind of start with a few housekeeping items first. But I'm Haley. I'm the Vice President of Marketing here at Southend, and just wanted to share a little bit about our disclaimers first before getting started. So the content that will be shared here today is only for educational purposes and does not constitute legal advice, and attendance or receipt of these materials does not create an attorney or client relationship. Laws and regulations are subject to change, and attendees should consult their qualified legal counsel if applicable or under their individual circumstances. Southend disclaims any liability from decisions made today based on the webinar's content. Truly just here to be able to share some best practices. And compound medications are not actually reviewed or verified by the FDA for safety, effectiveness, or quality, and are not FDA approved. I would also like to point out that in the bottom right hand of your screen, you should see some information on how to be able to drop in a question. We would love to hear from you at the end of this presentation. Any best practices that our speaker can speak to, we would love to make sure that we can share those and get those answered for you. So next we'll go into a little bit about Southend Pharmacy. Thank you for your attention to our video earlier. We are so excited to introduce to you our purpose-built facility live. We just completed back in December, 55,000 square feet that we have been working so hard on, and we're so proud of our compliance and operational teams and the work that went into making this facility operational with providers, their practices, and patient care always at the center. We are a Houston, Texas-based 503A compound pharmacy, and we're committed to delivering sterile compounded medications at the highest standards and quality. And at Southend, our reach is expanding. We operate and ship over 35 states across the United States. And so what makes Southend different, you might ask? So first, I want to highlight that along with our new state-of-the-art facility, we have a very dedicated QA/QC team. You'll see their photo here. These are our real people working in our lab, and just ensuring that everything that comes out of our lab is exactly what you intended your patient to have and more. So, and this facility is not just a place we work, it embodies like our dedication to the medications we produce every day, and the outcomes we hope you see in your practice. Next, we adhere to strict USP standards, and this means that every compound we create is crafted with the utmost care. We're also Legit Script certified, and so this kind of underscores our commitment to excellence, to you, your practice, and being able to grow with integrity and lead with that certification in the pharmacy industry. This assures our partners and patients that we follow the most stringent regulatory guidelines. And then third-party testing. This is a huge piece of just that QA/QC component and ensuring that we give you the transparency and confidence you need to deliver those patient outcomes you're looking for. So next, I would love to introduce to you our speaker. Darren Frank is a speaker. Also, a leadership and business growth expert, attorney, and founder of Anima Strategy and Infusive. He's also the author of a forthcoming book. Darren has also earned his degree in economics and his JD at Master of Law from Georgetown University. He's the co-founder of Infusive, helps doctors and medical professionals create new revenue streams by adding integrative modalities to their practice, streamlining supply chain, and managing their accounts in a centralized place with experts in those areas. He does coaching and business leadership. He works with entrepreneurs, owners, and who have had recent liquidity events and helps them guide on starting their next chapter and growing their practices. And he is originally from Baltimore, but lives in Charlotte with his family. And wow, we are so thrilled to have so much expertise here today. Darren kind of brings all this expertise to this corner where business growth, strategy, supply chain, and compliance all kind of come to a head. So, Darren, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. Really pleased. Thanks so much for having me. Really pleased to be here, Haley.
Yeah, so we're so excited to see what you'll present today, and I know everyone's excited to hear from you as well. So, I will let you take it away.
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks everybody for being here. We'll try and make this as riveting and interesting as compliance and anything related to it can be. Thanks for that great introduction, Haley, and thanks for giving my boring legal disclaimer for me. So I think we're all set there. So if we want to just go ahead and kick it off, just a little bit about me. So I do have a healthcare background. I have been in practice since 2010, so a little over 15 years in practice. I'm still licensed in a couple different states and have that background, and then was fortunate to get into the healthcare space and really learn this firsthand, both from the business perspective and from the legal perspective. Obviously, it's a very dynamic and changing space and keeps me on my toes and remains interesting staying on top of everything. So that's been really great. One of our focuses as a company, and so one of my main focuses is on this part of the pharmacy experience that clinics have, and that comes from everything from sourcing to pricing to compliance and allocation, so all the kind of things. But I really want to approach this from the perspective of the practitioner. That's really where we sit and where we really partner with folks and get with them and help them figure out how to grow in a safe and compliant way. So we have a passion for that. Um, Go ahead and grab that. Thank you. So just a little bit about us. So we are a sort of a managed service supply chain partner for IV therapy, integrated medicine clinics, telehealth. So people that are interested in sourcing all in one place, having experts on all these various topics, whether it is nutrients, supplies, peptides, hormones, exosomes, stem cells, equipment, ozone, any of that sort of fun stuff. So that's really where we come with this. We work with hundreds of clinics all over the country. So our intention is to use that kind of group leverage and purchasing power to help drive down costs and provide clinics at things more cost effectively than if could do it on their own, and also make sure we're doing everything that we can in a compliant way. I think 2026 is kind of the year of compliance. We're seeing much more compliance focused. The industry as a whole kind of ran ahead of a lot of the compliance regulations, and so now we're seeing some clawback and some changes, some states being really active, some activity at the federal level. So really want to demystify that, break that down, and just give people comfort that they can serve their patients and do that in a safe way that won't put them or their license or anything like that at risk. So just want to start with a little bit of the history of compounding pharmacies. I think it's really nice to have context for this. A lot of the conversations I have, people are unfamiliar just generally with the practice of compounding and what it is. So if I could take you back and, for me, somehow this is a Western town and, like a boarded up saloon and all of that sort of stuff. And you're going to your doctor who is potentially the veterinarian and the dentist and the barber all kind of wrapped into one. And that person would evaluate you and said you needed some laudanum or something like that. Okay, well, you're going to go down the street or the planks or whatever it is to somebody who can mix that up for you and give it to you. And this is sort of the first incidence of personalized medicine, right? Because what could happen there is there would be direct communication from the provider to whoever was making the medication for the person and saying, hey, this person needs this in particular. So this is really the first personalized medicine before there was anything related to mass manufacturing, really in any sector, right? This then, of course, as the practice of medicine scaled, the practice of pharmacy and medication manufacturing scaled along with it. So, then it became, there was a first of all, there became a doctor, divorced from the other practices. Then there became a pharmacist who was really the expert in all of those different compounds as the available compounds increased. And so then we could prepare these individualized things for folks. This then, of course, as we had the Industrial Revolution and all industries kind of went this way, the same thing happened in drug manufacturing, right? Where you figured out, okay, the postal service got better and the methods of delivery got better, the methods of delivery of care got better. So then we could manufacture in a more cost-effective way towards large-scale manufacturing. This then has, as we have had some more of these, I wrote them in here as niche therapies, but things that I think kind of fall in the middle in the integrative medicine category, like IV therapy, like peptide therapy, that you've had a modern resurgence of compounding pharmacies as a result of that. So I think it's just important to understand what happened, where that came from, and sort of how they have come to prominence and thus under scrutiny lately. So generally, why do we want to regulate pharmacies? I think this ought to be somewhat intuitively obvious, but it bears saying, and the reason it bears saying is going to come up in a couple slides. But we didn't always regulate them, and it didn't start out as a regulated practice in the same way that medicine didn't start out as regulated, right? There wasn't a board of physicians back in the day to sort of regulate a scope of practice and to prescribe those things for doctors. So of course, patient safety. So anything that relates to patient safety, quality control. So consistency, quality control, some of that is directly to the product being manufactured. Southend said they do endotoxin testing on every vial, right? So there's a quality control issue that they're solving for, but you want to have some standard for that across the board, and then some standard that, hey, if you are making a standard medication, that there is some standardization to that, right? And it's not totally something else and you're just labeling it something else, right? We see this in food quite a lot, where it's sort of questionable as to whether the thing that it says it is actually really much of that, right? So you can get cheese made of not cheese, right? So some more consistency of that, standardization of that, prevention of any contamination and errors there, because we have seen some things there. And then, of course, the regulatory response to that and the incidents that have happened, of course, drive the regulations. I think this is true in any field. Anytime there is an incident, we have a regulation that responds to that. So it tends to be what I said earlier about the industry outrunning the regulations a little bit. Same thing in all fields, that if there is an incident, there will be a regulatory response. The way that they find out the regulations are insufficient or need more guidance or more specificity are through incidents that happen that they failed to anticipate. So say, well, we failed to anticipate this, let's figure that out. This is sort of akin to flying, right? I like to use that metaphor where they say the pre-flight checklist is written in blood. So it's kind of the same thing here, actually. I think people tend to think that this has generally been a safe practice over time, and that may be true, but there have been incidents, right? Same with flying. We learned from that, we changed regulations. That's sort of how we got to where we are today. So some of the things that seem silly or seem onerous are because something bad happened and you have to solve for those edge cases. So this is one of those edge cases. This was a major incident in the world of pharmacy compounding. New England Compounding Center crisis. This happened in 2012. And this was a compounding pharmacy where they had an outbreak of fungal meningitis. You can see there nearly 800 cases of that, 64 deaths. So we because a lot of these compounds are so generally safe, I think we underestimate the potential of harm, right? And this can happen if places are not responsible. It's why we always choose pharmacy partners first for safety, because really nothing is worth putting your patients at risk, in our opinion. So that asymmetric risk is just so big. I mean, this was sort of one compounding error essentially, and it resulted in all of this. So this can be really, really damaging and dangerous. This is also a particularly important incident, I think, not only to underscore why it's very, very important to choose the right pharmacy partners, but also to talk about why the regulations are the way they were, because prior to this, there were not standardizations around certain types of compounding. So this really drove the need for that. So really, this incident established the 503B pharmacy. So it created this entirely different category. Before, when you just had kind of the 503A category of compounding, you got to think back to the origin of all of this, which was, okay, we have one patient, we're making one vial for one patient. Your potential for harm there is essentially one patient, right? Because you're making to the individual, and then if you create or if you have a harm in that vial, okay, you're gonna hurt one person. Regrettable, of course, but not really at the scale to which we're seeing this or what that New England Compounding Center incident was, right? Where there were a lot of people harmed, whether they ended up dying or not. So when you then are going into what we call batch compounding or compounding in bulk compounding, is potentially many more. You make one batch that may touch, thousands of people. And if because in those situations, you can split dose a vial or dose it to multiple patients, it may be even multiples of that, right? So the FDA said, okay, well, if this is the way this is going, remember we have this sort of mass scale manufacturing happening. Now, instead of making only ever to one patient, we are making to multiple people all at once. We need to have different standards for that. So again, maybe something that would seem obvious in hindsight, but really took a major incident for that to happen. So this created this in 20, remember that happened in 2012. So in 2013, the FDA came out with the Drug Quality and Security Act. This created 503B pharmacies outsourcing facilities, as they're called, which is really intended to produce medications in bulk for a lot of that. So it's a larger scale of compounding. They have a different regulation that they're required to adhere to in terms of compounding to CGMP. And this is really what's intended for sort of your office use, clinic use. And it's important to note, I think, that like in the IV therapy space, this is really where this is most applicable, right? Your IV nutrients that are going in a bag, you are not going to put one entire vial of every single nutrient mixed in an IV bag to somebody. IVs would cost $1,000 a piece. It just wouldn't make a lot of sense. But to really be compliant with that, everything there would have to come from an outsourcing facility. That's typically where we see their use. So just a quick little primer for A and B. I just find some people get a little bit confused about this, so it's just helpful to go over. So for A, every vial is one patient, one vial, one prescription. So you have to pre-submit a prescription. You cannot keep A in stock without having a prescription for somebody. You cannot backdate prescriptions. You cannot do anything like that to technically be compliant. So this is, okay, patient comes in, they are evaluated and treated. We write a prescription for them. They get a medication that way. That is really the A use. These, of course, are state. They are also federally regulated, but they are state regulated also to USB standards. And usually these are more custom and tend to be smaller scale. Now, I would say that, but say that Southend is actually bigger than a lot of B pharmacies. So not always the case, but we have seen some A's really, really grow and do that well. So that just tends to be a smaller scale manufacturing, right? Where you're not making 10,000 vials at once of, one nutrient, one peptide, one whatever. So scale in that way. For the B, bulk for office use. So office use is the way this is technically talked about or typically talked about, where, okay, I can order 1,000 vials of B complex if I want to, and just leave it in the shelf. When a patient comes in, then I am able to administer in office. So this is really for B is really for things administered in office. You are administering an IV to somebody technically. So that is where you would use, a nutrient that way if you could do it that way. They are also federally and state regulated according to CGMP. But if you look at the list of Bs, I think only 40% of them have actually been inspected by the FDA. So they are selectively regulated, I suppose you would say. But technically, they have to adhere to all those requirements. And then this is really where you can standardize the med. So the standardization customization is a big differentiator here, right? Where if you call B pharmacy and say, hey, I want this vial with glycine instead of with B6, they don't do that, right? That's not how they customize. Customization really happens on the A side, happens with the smaller scale. So again, a compounding here, patient specific. So you do have to have a patient specific prescription there and a way to compliantly submit that prescription, document that, all of that. Very individualized. So a lot of A pharmacies have catalogs that have, thousands and thousands of prescriptions in them because they will do true individualization. And that is the original intent of this, right? That there was a medication that was, potentially commercially produced by, say, a large pharmaceutical company, and say you had a patient that couldn't tolerate something in it that made it shelf stable, or was in an addition that wasn't strictly speaking necessary to the delivery of the medication to the patient. Well, we want to be able to provide for that patient. The whole underpinning of A compounding is prescriber judgment. And I think that's really important to understand. That'll play in later, of course, to the peptide and other conversations. But prescriber judgment really started this whole conversation. What we have wanted and what we have enforced and the way that the regulations are written generally is going to protect and bias prescriber judgment. You want prescribers to have the authority to do what they think is best for the patient. And generally speaking, the regulators have not wanted to get involved in what is good or bad prescriber judgment. So there are things at the extreme of that, of course. If are grossly negligent or do something that's, really, really outside the lines, of course that can be implicated. But generally, we have been very relaxed, I would say, in terms of looking at the prescribers themselves and trying to interfere with their ability to really prescribe what's best for the patient. And that is what a lot of what has enabled 503As to thrive, because that's really the basis for their compounding. For Bs, it's a little bit different, and we've got a slide on that too here. But this is really not for bulk use. This is really for that individualized medicine, and I think is an important thing to know and understand. So patients with unique needs, that's really what we're after here and what we want to support. So B, of course, different, right? So this is your bulk purchasing. This is not an individual patient thing. Bs really can produce when something is on the bulks list. So it is a specific list that they're allowed to produce from, or sort of a shortage as well. So we saw this, of course, with the peptides and semaglutide and a lot of fights. And I'm, sure if you're at all keyed into this space and you're here on the webinar, you have heard something about that. But of course, for a time, it was not able to be produced. And in that sort of situation, what the FDA will want to do is say, okay, well, there's harm to the patient in not being able to receive a medication, right? So theoretically still, and I'm sure everybody has various opinions about the FDA, but the real stated intention there is to protect the patient in some capacity, right? So we want patients to have access to medications that would help them. So our way of doing that is saying, okay, well, if there is a shortage, then this can come into the compounding pharmacies. The compounding pharmacies can produce on the B side. So they could produce identical copies, right? So this is a difference too, that if something is in shortage, a B could literally copy the formulation and make that formulation. But once it comes off the shortage list, they can't produce it anymore. Then, of course, you have all these lawsuits that you had and all these different things. We have seen peptides largely come out of the Bs for that reason, right? They don't have the same ground to stand on, where you saw, some of the As win a lawsuit actually against some of the pharmaceutical companies, really because they could stand on the shoulders of the prescriber has told us that the patient needs it. And that is a very strong bulwark upon which to build a defense, because like I said, we have been, I think wisely, averse to interfering with anything that would implicate prescriber judgment. So we really have not done that. But the Bs have not been so successful in that, which is why that's a little bit more unstable in terms of what they can produce and how. So really you should have a standardized formulation here. Typically you can see some longer bud dates, although that's through stability studies, and we've seen some As like Southend have terrific bud dates, so not always a thing. And FDA inspected, of course, assuming they have been inspected. You can go, and I encourage people to go onto the FDA's website. You can look at the outsourcing facility list. If you do anything where you would source from a B, like a compound, like a IV therapy, go on there, look at the outsourcing facility list, look at the letters. They're public. You can see them. If you Google FDA notice letters, you can look at pharmacies and check them out and see kind of what's there and see what changes they've made, and it's a good resource, right? Um, so general regulatory structure, I think this is important to understand too, as a practice, as a physician practice, who regulates me, right? And you always have two levels of regulation in this country. One is a federal level regulation, one is a state level regulation. So the way that they interact is federal regulation, to the extent that it exists, sets certain standards. States can then make federal standards more strict. They can never loosen federal standards. So if the FDA has said something, so say something around compounding IV bags and 797 and sanitary compounding regulations, a state can't come in really and say, you don't have to listen to the FDA, you don't have to do that. They can not enforce to the same degree, it's a different question, but they can't actually change the federal regulation. They could say, hey, in addition to this, you have to do these other things. California, of course, is very famous for this. They like to take the federal regulations up a notch. They are at perfect liberty to do that, right? So that's why you see fewer pharmacies typically registered in the state of California, especially on the B side. So some of that is true and is up to the states. But technically, could FDA come into a IV practice and look at their operation and get them in trouble for violating compounding laws at the federal level? They could, right? Have we seen that a lot? No. I mean, typically they're leaving that up to the states, but just to say technically it happens. The interesting interaction usually happens at the state level because I think even the regulators seem determined not to understand this, which I think probably understandable reasons. They like to have their amount of power. But if you are a physician practice, and whether you are a physician in the practice every day, clearly you're a physician practice, or you are, say, a nurse and you have a overseeing physician from a group like Guardian MD or something like that, where you are using their license to order medications and technically to operate under and expand your scope of practice, it's still a physician practice, right? I think people, especially in the IV space, sometimes the retail hydration space, pretend like it's not the practice of medicine. It's the practice of medicine, right? You're operating under physician license, so you are a physician practice. Now, you have then the pharmacy board. So you obviously have the physician board. As a physician practice, you have to adhere to the rules of the physician board. Of course, if you're a nurse, the nursing board is implicated in that, or coordinate to your license, right? But the pharmacy board, normally when I give this in person, I like to ask, hey, raise your hand if you think that the pharmacy board regulates you. And like every hand goes up. And the truth is they don't. The pharmacy board does not have authority to regulate physician practices unless the physician board were to give that authority to the pharmacy board, which of course they're not going to do. Compounding is a really integral part of physician practice, right? You have to be able to mix in the office and do certain things. So they have not come in and said, hey, everybody that does any of this has to be a pharmacist and can be regulated by the pharmacy board. What the pharmacy board does regulate is the medication getting to your door, basically, right? So what you then do with it after typically does not implicate the pharmacy board unless you are violating some of their sourcing rules. So we want to keep the pharmacy board away from a physician practice, right? We don't want to give them reason to say, try and come and regulate any of what you're doing, create any issues, interfere with you providing the care that you want to provide to your patients, right? So the key to doing that is to be following these rules around A and around B, right? I talk to people all too often that are, say, ordering improperly from an A pharmacy, and no fault of the pharmacy, right? But they are submitting prescriptions for people they saw a couple days ago, using those medications later. This is just a disaster waiting to happen, right? Because then if the pharmacy board comes in and figures out that you're violating their rules, they tend to be very up in arms about that. And that is where we see sort of the most enforcement, and people have issues, have licensure issues, have shutdown issues, or when they're sort of violating those rules. In terms of the actual practice of your medicine, that is not the pharmacy board. How you use the medication in practice, that is really the physician board. But we have seen the availability here for them to shut you down, take your license, things like that. So two sides of that. I think you've got your ordering compliance and your administration compliance, right? Ordering is really sourcing legally, sourcing from registered pharmacies. You don't have to, I know what I said about looking at the notice letters and all of that. That's more for your information and, so you can feel good about the quality that you're providing to your patients. Or work with a group like ours that does that visits these pharmacies, that really picks our partners quite carefully. But it is really the legality of sourcing, right? Like you are not the FDA. You do not have to regulate the pharmacy. So you do not have to, read these and really discern. We actually have a client who was one of the prescribing physicians from New England Compounding Center. So luckily, none of his patients were harmed by that. It was a different med that they were making that he wasn't using with his patients. But ultimately, he was called up. They called every sort of person they had on record. And in the end of the day, they said, well, you're not the FDA, right? Like, it's not your job to, what do we expect you to do? See patients all week and then fly to New England and inspect a pharmacy? Like, that's not really under their purview, right? And we wouldn't even know what we're looking for. So, um, I, but I still think it is worth knowing that stuff and making sure you are sourcing legally and compliantly, which means, complying with the prescription submission rules, making sure you're sticking to that one by one patient rule on the A side, using B for office use sort of in bulk as it was intended. On the administration side, you of course have your handling of the meds and you got your documentation of their use. Um, this is, our things, and this is a little bit different in every state, but there are some federal rules here about, and you can look this up. Usually it's under USP 797 will handle some of this, but handling and locking up the medications at night, simple things like that. And these are not as much in a shutdown risk. This is more if there is an incident, right? And we have seen this happen. A lot of these practices are so generally safe that I think we don't think about it. But we have had clinics give us a call and say, hey, we just had like 12 people go to the hospital, right? And somebody got sick. Can we look at all this? And we have to say, okay, hey, we need to do incident reports. Like, what lot numbers did you use of what meds? What did they get in what dose? How are those handled? How are they stored? The board is going to come in. They're going to take a look at this. You're going to have to sort of show your SOPs for all this sort of stuff. So I think having that on hand and having that ready is just, we think of that like a really good insurance policy against should anything wrong happen, right? And I think the proper evaluation of risk in this is not how likely is something to happen, but it is how likely is something to happen. Plus, if it happens, how big is the harm? Because we're in this area of asymmetric risk where even if it's unlikely for it to happen, this is medicine, the harm can be catastrophic. So in that sense, your exposure is the same. So if you can do little things that would take this off the table and we view properly ordering and handling your meds and documenting your meds as pretty low rent, right? That there are systems like ours, partners like ours that will take this off your plate. There's ways to do this and that are easy. So we really strongly encourage this on both sides of it, and they're really equally critical should you have any kind of incident. So peptides, obviously a hot topic and one that's kind of fun to talk about right now. I think especially I've been saying something relatively consistent for a couple of years and time I think is proving it accurate, which is nice. So you have this whole question around peptides, like how legal are they? Where can I get them from? You have this whole gray market area. What does that mean? What does that mean to me? So I'm really going to talk from the perspective of the prescriber here and what you would need to know in terms of where your liability is, because I think that's the biggest question that you ought to think about, right? You are not all lawyers, and I think even then it is difficult to parse some of this stuff sometimes. And so, like, what can you be expected to do? What can you be expected to know? And what steps can you take to protect yourself, right, and your patients? So a couple aspects to this. Consents. So I've heard this thrown around a lot, which is, well, if we have the patient sign consents, we're protected. I just want to tell you, consents will not protect you. And you should have people sign them. You should absolutely use them. We typically recommend you have a couple sets of consents for, meds that are or are not FDA approved. But even like Haley said in the disclaimer, things that come out of a compounding pharmacy, not FDA approved. Things like IV therapy, not FDA approved. So much of the world of what we do is FDA approved, not FDA approved. To us, that's not really a real delineating factor. But I think if you are relying on your consents to protect you, they are a paper shield. That we have seen licenses lost, there have been consents, they generally won't hold up. So, not to say that you shouldn't do them or they don't matter. They are a part of proper documentation, which is important, but just don't put all your eggs in that basket. I just don't think that's a wise approach. Um, there's some rules around dispensing that I think are important. Some 503B pharmacies out there are still making peptides. If you are ordering those and then you are dispensing them to a patient, meaning giving a patient a syringe, giving them a vial to take home, you're kind of stepping into the shoes of the pharmacy there. So you are taking on an additional amount of liability. Some states this is really easy to do in, some states it is not. California, surprisingly, actually relatively easy to get a dispensing license. A lot of states require additional licensure. Some states prohibit it almost entirely, like Texas on the other surprising side of the coin. I figure most things are legal in Texas, but not physician dispensing. You have to meet some crazy exemptions about rural areas and other things like that. So typically not allowed. So you can think of dispensing, and I think this is just a thing you need to know, which is why I mention it, of the act of labeling. So you become the labeler essentially, right? So from a B pharmacy, I have ordered a vial of tirzepatide, whatever, if you can find one that's still making it. And then there's no patient name on that. But then if I'm going to hand it to a patient, I'm then stepping into that sort of part of the pharmacy scope, labeling the vial and doing that. That is an additional point of liability, right? So are you doing that properly? Are you delegating that properly? In some states, nurses can do that, and some they can't. In some, they can only do it in North Carolina. They can only do it if the physician is physically present in the office. So there is a lot of nuance to those rules as well that you also have to puzzle out. With A, this is much more straightforward because you have ordered it under the name of that patient. If you have that shipped to the office, it's already labeled in that patient's name. So when you hand it to the patient, you are not actually engaging in the act of dispensing. So I think that's important. We are here talking about essentially how to reduce your liability as much as possible and do this in the safest way possible. So from that perspective, an A and not having to comply with the dispensing requirements around the B is a much easier and safer way to do this typically. Pharmacy source and laboratory source, this of course is one of the major hot topics in terms of where things are made. I call laboratory sourced anything not made in a pharmacy, gray market, black market, whatever you want to call them. We've seen direct statements that laboratory sourced and non-pharmacy produced, and whether it says, research use, or now we're seeing physician use only, or novelty, or whatever. All these are essentially terms of art, right? It's like putting natural on a food packaging, right? It doesn't actually mean anything. It doesn't protect you in any way. It doesn't really help. And these are in our stance now, and I think the regulators are coming out and saying this pretty directly, is that these are illegal to use. So we've also had questions around quality. Since those are not regulated in that space, they don't have to adhere to all the regulations that an A pharmacy like Southend does have to adhere to. So what are you really getting? We have gotten laboratory peptides, sent them out for testing, and a vial of tirzepatide was 17% tirzepatide. So do I think that, and there's really in that instance, not a lot of action that you could take, right? So do I think that there are labs out there that produce excellent product? Probably, right? But are you protected? The answer is no. Because if you use that kind of product, all the liability rests on you. And this is really where we have seen, on the left side, I put DOJ activity in the space because you've now seen DOJ get involved and come in and strip provider licenses. And one of the most recent ones I read on this was it was because the patient thought they were getting a pharmaceutical product. That was enough. They had consents, they had other things, didn't matter. So this is where I say you can't hide behind that and that you really have to be careful about where you're sourcing from. And our saying here is make sure it is from a good reputable A pharmacy, because that is really the place you're the most protected. If you get a vial from Southend, they have to adhere to certain standards, and they go to great pains to adhere to those. And so they don't want to get in trouble. because a lot of the liability rests on them, almost all of it, actually. I can't legally say that all the liability is on them, but almost all the liability is on them in that case, which as the physician is where you want it, right? And they're willing to stand behind that and say, we make a quality product, this is what we do. And that's what you want. Whereas on the lab side, you carry all the liability. So that's the issue. You have a patient has a bad reaction, true or not. We've all dealt with those kind of patients, right, too, where, oh, this is a bad thing, but, really could have been coincidence, could have been something else. You, in that situation, do not want to be holding the bag and answering questions about why the vials are not actually from a pharmacy when you can source nearly all of this from a pharmacy at this point. Some regulatory trends, I think we're seeing this more and more. You do need to look a little bit at regulatory intent and what the regulators care about and what they want to do. So, they are caring, about this patient safety. We have seen, and we saw some recent guidance from the FDA. Now, guidance is guidance, right? It is not binding enforceable law, but it is really good evidence of their intent. And if you get a local inspector, somebody comes in, whether from the board or whatever, the intent matters because there's a lot of rules. They have some discretion in how they apply them. So this whole idea of patient-specific prescribing is really central under 503A. To me, that reads as a sort of vote of confidence in the A's. And I think what we're seeing is, compounding move away in some situations from the B's and like really come to the A's. It seems like what they want is for the A's to be making the peptides, right? That seems to be the space that they want the A's to come from. They want you as the provider to really be making patient-specific recommendations. And that's really where this documentation of clinical difference is. So that, when you're submitting, okay, why do we need to have it with a B vitamin or something like that, to just make sure that we are noting that. And there are various ways to do this and systems to help you with this. It's not particularly onerous, but to have some sort of statement of clinical difference seems to be really, really important to the FDA, which I think just supports the idea that this is where they want the compounding done, this is why they want it done here, and this is how. But I also think it's a vote of confidence in the physicians, right? If I'm to read it that way, which is, we really still want to trust your judgment. We still want to support your judgment that if you are able to do this and able to sort of hurdle over this honestly fairly low bar, that we will continue to support it, right? And support that trend. Whereas they could have gone the other direction and ripped it out of the compounding pharmacies, right? I think Genie would have been out of the bottle and, you would push it toward a central black market at that point, which they don't want to do. But, this feels good from somebody who's been in the space a long time and you don't really know what's going to happen always with the availability of some of these compounds. So this seems to me to be a really positive thing. But that to the B's, I think has been different. Now they are limiting a little bit more bulk compounding. Seems like they don't want these made in massive batches, for just anybody and don't want to kind of go that way. So it's really, again, to the prescriber judgment, and all that part of it. So DOJ activity is really that. I think you want to stay off the radar of the DOJ. I hope that goes without saying. They're really only going to get involved in almost more criminal activities, which is what they are considering now in most places, the use of something like a laboratory, a non-pharmacy peptide. So again, order from a pharmacy, easy answer. So a couple key takeaways, just the pharmacy types. A, patient specific, really customized meds there. B, the bulk for clinics use. This whole compliance chain, just remember that your compliance starts at the time you're ordering the med, like whether this is an IV nutrient, a bag of saline, a catheter, anything like that really starts at that point in time, goes all the way through administration to documentation. So just make sure you are keeping that whole compliance chain. If there is any evidence, like there's a lot of heightened scrutiny on this area, a lot of eyes on this area. It's a hot area. Just make sure you are taking the extra 2 minutes and documenting properly, just to make sure. We have seen, okay, well, I didn't really document this properly. It's a friend of mine or whatever, and it turns into a whole thing, license lost, clinic shut down, whatever. Don't do that. Take the extra couple minutes. I also think that, we are in kind of a nascent industry and the industry's at a nascent stage. The extent to which we get regulated is going to be the extent to which we prove ourselves responsible. So like the more compliant we are without, really strict enforcement or oversight, the less we are going to get, right? And we have seen some unfortunate counterexamples of that, like Jennifer's Law and things like that in Texas. So I really just encourage this and please do that. On the business success side, this stability around the supply chain, I think will protect your patient care and will protect your business success. I think if you do not have a stable supply chain, if you're unable to provide in a good way, if something is pulled, you really need to have a solid foundation there for the clinic that makes sense and enables you to thrive. So now I'd like to jump to questions if anybody has them. Happy to answer and field some of those. And otherwise, hope that was informative and semi-enjoyable.
Yes, it seems like the questions are coming through and in a true Southend form. We're hoping that this wasn't too heavy, too thick, and I think it was that perfect balance, Darren. We are getting some questions flying in. I would love to kind of jump to a couple that I think will really help round out the conversation and also open up that best practice lens that I know you can provide. One of them being kind of as these regulatory expectations continue to evolve, what gaps do you see operationally or like in compliance in organizations that are scaling quickly that maybe you can speak to the audience today about making sure they have those buttoned up?
Yeah, most of what we see candidly is well, you see it a little bit everywhere. So I think on the ordering side, there is the making sure you're ordering from the right place, right? I have talked to a lot of people that think they're ordering from a pharmacy and they're not. Where the last time I gave a similar talk to this, I was at an educational conference and talking to a bunch of doctors, and he says, "Well, my pharmacy labels the vial physician use only. They don't label it, the other way." And I said, that's not a pharmacy, right? And I said, well, where are you sourcing from? They told me the name of it. And I said, that's not a registered pharmacy. So there are some super obvious, I think, open-ended errors there, which is, be really clear about it. And I wouldn't even bring that up because it also, again, I think seems self-evident, but I have that conversation multiple times a week where somebody thinks they're ordering from a pharmacy, they're not. So that's the biggest one that I can see at the moment. I think there is also, as you scale, what we see become difficult is tracking and management. So on the inventory tracking side, especially if you do anything like IV or anything like that, I think it is hard. There is like, I don't mean to toot our own horn and make this too self-promotional, but I think ours is the only system that actually will document inventory properly in a compliant way for IV. So there aren't a lot of ready-built systems out there, but there are ways to do it, right? I mean, technically you can do it manually with paper and pencil. It's just a lot to do. So I would say making sure that's there because I think as you grow too, your risk gets bigger. Like say you have one location and you make a mistake, okay, one location goes down. You have 10 locations, your risk becomes more asymmetric because you're under one umbrella. What do you think is going to happen if you hurt a patient in one location and then there's an issue with your sourcing and then that goes down, especially if they're all under one license or something like that? So I think it is, as you scale, it is more important to make sure you're checking those boxes and making sure that everything is just buttoned up from a regulatory perspective. I know it seems like a lot, but it's really not that difficult, right? Like it's not complex. It's a little bit detail oriented and difficult, but it's not complex. So I think those are
Yeah,
the biggest ones that we
seems
see.
like it would be an obvious gap to, address or be able to recognize, but sometimes it's just good even to point that out, while things seem like they check out, making sure you dot your I's and cross your T's. Next question, Darren, in your experience, what are some of the best practices some companies should implement across like marketing and sales or operations to like communicate effectively, but just kind of trying to mitigate risk?
Yeah, the advertising space has been really, really interesting because that has changed a lot actually, where it used to be that, okay, when this first kind of started, when we first started doing, say, the GLP-1s, you would get in trouble if you used semaglutide or tirzepatide on an ad. Then it was okay, but then at that time it was safe to say peptides or to say GLP-1s. Now it seems like you can't say GLP-1s anymore, that has clawed back, and it seems like we're just getting more and more restrictive. And even now, we've had clinics get warned for using peptide, right? So we like to look at the entirety of what you're doing as a practice and as a provider, I think, to be able to communicate that effectively. People are not coming to you just to get a med, hopefully, right? They're coming to you for your expertise, your guidance, your package of care and treatment, and to really talk about it that way. From a risk mitigation standpoint on the sales and marketing side is how we recommend talking about it, right? You don't have a GLP-1 program, you have a weight loss program, or a body composition programming. It may be that as part of that program, sometimes you are prescribing to somebody a GLP-1. But it is a little bit more of a way to do it that encompasses the whole treatment program. I think provides better value to the client, keeps you more protected from a risk standpoint too, in terms of what we're seeing on the advertising laws.
Great. That's some great insight there. I think we'll kind of shift to some live questions if you're okay with that.
Sure.
It looks like we've got some questions just surrounding specificities of specific, um, you know, formulas as they come through, and they just want to understand for compounds. Maybe the question is, I have 4 dose compound variations that I like to use overall for my patients, and I like to pick one of those for each one of my patients. This combined with clinical difference documentation, is that considered sufficient in your opinion in order to be able to prescribe some certain type of peptide or um, indicate for a specific compound?
Yeah, I would say generally the answer to that is going to be yes. It's hard without a much more detailed conversation, to be totally honest. So, I fall back on my disclaimer here about this being legal advice. But yeah, I think the answer to that generally is going to be yes, right? Like if you are taking some pains to do individualized dosing, that is important, right? Where if you were, in the early days of this, we saw that a lot. Technically for a compounding pharmacy to be able to produce some of these, there has to be even like a 10% difference in something like concentration or things like that. So, you've got two sides of this. I would call that like an extra cautious stance, honestly. I think you can lean on the pharmacies here that are more compliance forward, like Southend, right? That they're not going to produce something that they think is risky. So if you're looking at their catalog and going, okay, hey, they're making it in this particular strength, and that's a dosing that will last over 30 days, whatever. That feels good to me, honestly. But sure, you can go off standard dosing. I know a lot of clinicians that start people at sort of below the half dose of kind of what the pharmaceutical dose is or whatever it is, and they feel like that protects them. The clinical difference statements, yes, I do think that protects you. I think it also protects the pharmacy. There's a little bit of a two-way street there that's happening. So we're seeing a lot of pharmacies now that are requiring clinical difference statements. I don't remember off the top of my head if Southern requires those, Haley, I apologize, but that will require that for a submission of prescription, and then they have sort of parameters around that. So I think there I would recommend, chatting to your pharmacy partner to seeing what's required there. But I do think it is helpful to document that and the reason that you think that, right? And those statements, we have seen them can be relatively simple. You do not need to go into a really episodic explanation about an entire patient history and why, because of something they ingested, they were sick, that they may be insensitive to something and have IBS and need or whatever. Okay, we need a little B vitamin for some fatigue or something. So it can be a little one-liner, but it is what you're doing is a risk mitigating approach, and I would say in general I like it. And yes, doing more will tend to mitigate more than doing less will, right? So I would commend that approach generally.
Great. Awesome, Darren. So as far as best practices for more documentation on compounds that you would order for your patients, is it recommended to get a C of A on every lot? And again, I order from pharmacies only.
To me, C of A's, I feel two ways about CFAs. I have seen a lot of C of A's. I have seen a lot of fake COAs. Um, I don't know anything about Photoshop, but I think even I could do it in 8 seconds on ChatGPT. I just don't know. Do I think it is harmful to have them? The better pharmacies will tend to make them easily accessible, right? If somebody makes it really, really hard to get a C of A, do I does it implicate my trust in the pharmacy, assuming they provide them? I mean, it does a little bit, right? And we have seen that to some degree. I wouldn't necessarily hang my hat on it. I think really there it is on the pharmacy, right? And you want to do as much as you can for your patient. I think your obligation there is to order from a good licensed pharmacy. And I don't think it is your obligation to check the integrity of every batch, right? And, I don't think reputable pharmacies would do anything like play around with their C of A's. Most of the ones I have seen, falsified have come from laboratory companies. But do I think that it's necessary to do that for every batch? No. I mean, we order, thousands and thousands of vials of every sort of conceivable compound. We do not check C of A's on every single compound that we order for every batch, right? Like I think that's infeasible because the good pharmacies, if they get a result that's out of standard for their compounding standards, they will hold the batch. So in theory, if they are shipping at all, you already know it's past quality control if it's coming from a pharmacy. Because you got to think from the pharmacy's risk perspective too. If they know something is bad and then ship something that's bad, you're in a world of trouble, right? Where the responsible thing, and you will see happen if you're in this long enough, which is a batch will come back out of spec. There'll be a couple additional endotoxins. The concentration will come back slightly out of spec, whatever it is, and they'll just pull the batch and they just won't ship it, right? So you want to find people that operate the right way, so you're really not having to do something like order a COA from every batch. That would be my perspective.
Yeah, that's a great best practice and consideration for that. The next question we have here for you, Darren, is surrounding BUD dating. Is it an issue if you don't use the product as quickly as you like, or if you have bulk product that is past that BUD dating?
I would under no circumstances use anything past a BUD. I think that is just asking for trouble, to be totally candid, right? Like, our BU date's conservative, yes. The way that BU dates typically are formulated is through stability studies. So what a pharmacy is doing is compounding something, and then they are putting some of it aside in sort of a petri dish and seeing how long it takes for a contaminant to grow on it. Some variation of that process, right? And these sort of stability studies, how long do we know that this is safe, are established and lengthened over time. So I think there's two sides to the question. One side is, is it safe for a patient to use things beyond a bud? Um, Potentially, depending, right? But do you want to take that chance? And if you do something like that and there is harm to the patient, you are very much on the line for that, right? Now you have again where I was saying, ordering from a pharmacy versus a lab, remember that shifts the liability from yourself to the pharmacy essentially for the integrity of the compound. If you do something like use a product past its bud date, you are now shifting that liability all the way back onto yourself. Because if you call Southend, or any pharmacy in the country, and you say, hey, I have a vial that expired in March, and I gave it to a patient yesterday, and they had a reaction, what do you have to say about it? They're going to say, well, you should have paid attention to the bud date, and they're totally right. So I would personally, under no circumstances, could I ever recommend you use something beyond a bud date. I think it's one of the things, we help clinics do is sort of order to their consumption so that they can use everything from within a bud date. So there, I think you just need to, either work with a group like us or find a way to improve your ordering practices so that you're not wasting and not having things out of bud. Then also, if you're doing something like bulk compounding and IV therapy, you got your 28-day rule, right? Where once you puncture a vial, you got to use it within 28 days, assuming you're storing it properly that whole time. So again, under no circumstances would I recommend going beyond that. Even and if you have to throw it out, you have to throw it out, right? Like it's throwing it out and losing a couple $100 is way better than again, even if it's unlikely, the potential risk of using something beyond a bud date, having a patient reaction, having them come back to you, that risk level is catastrophic, right? Like that's shut down, that's licensed, that's maybe millions of dollars potentially, right? Like we live in a litigious society, so we need to act like it, sadly.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. And you took the words right out of my mouth. The puncture rule and some of those specificities kind of help guide that. And just being informed is really important there. And just having a partner you can rely on, whether it be reliable shipping and logistical pieces to ensure you can, manage those BUD and puncture rules, when you're dealing with patients and bringing them up to speed. Darren, this has been so insightful today. We are so thankful for your expertise, and this has been recorded and will be shared, and we will add it to our YouTube channel. We'll push it out via emails. And you'll also see some shorts, hopefully, of these two on our social channels. So excited to be able to bring out the little nuggets from here. And then hopefully you can share all the best practices with your clinics and, staff or whoever wasn't able to join today. But for those of you who joined, participation was fantastic. Darren, your reputation speaks for itself. We're so ecstatic that you could partner with us today, and hopefully more collaboration in the future.
Thanks so much for having me. It was great to be here. If anybody wants to reach out, has additional questions after this, feel free. We're at goinfusive.com is an easy way to get a hold of us. Ask any questions you have. Happy to engage outside of this, of course, and help in any way I can. Love this area of medicine. Really want to see it done safely and effectively for patients. Have watched so many lives change, and it's been an honor to be a part of it. So thank you all to all the participants for your engagement and for being here. And for one to hear this message. So thanks again. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.